Welcome to the Next Level Casino Careers Show, a series highlighting industry tips and insights from the best minds in the casino and hospitality industry. Enjoy the show.
Good morning, Bronwen. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm good. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you on. I know we talked a little bit before the recording, and I was so glad. We've had a past guest, Chandra, one of the leaders at IGT, a friend of mine as well. She put us together, and I'm glad she did because your insights and your career story, I think, are going to be perfect for this platform. Next Level Casino Careers. We're just trying to help people in their own career journeys, find insights, stories, inspiration so that they can apply to themselves and hopefully take their career to the next level. So some brief highlights here. You're the Senior Account Manager of Emerging Markets at Gaming and Casinos Portfolio Lead for Insight Global. You're also the President of WISE of Las Vegas, which is a leading voice and resource for professional women in sports and entertainment events. And GGW, which has been mentioned a lot from past guests as far as its impact within the industry. You're the co-chair for Global Gaming Women. So there's a lot there, but before we get into what you do and why you do it, I think it's important to start with the origin story, right? So people can understand, where you grew up, what your early interests were, and maybe some key stops along the way, and ultimately what you do today. So if you wouldn't mind sharing your origin story with the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had actually kind of a crazy upbringing. I'm from Northern Virginia, right outside DC. I was a teen pregnancy, actually didn't meet my biological father until my late 20s, and didn't know my full ethnicity, actually. Turns out I'm South Asian, half Pakistani Indian, but didn't know that growing up in a blonde family and not knowing that paternal side. But I unfortunately so I was raised by my grandparents, which was amazing. But unfortunately, when my grandfather was he didn't have healthcare coverage for about 2 weeks while he was switching jobs, had a massive stroke, and it kind of wiped us out, bankrupted us. So I grew up very poor, Section 8 housing. I remember touring group homes, growing up on food stamps, waiting in church basements for canned food. It was definitely a struggle. And my grandmother, she ended up passing from breast cancer when I was 16. And that became kind of a little obsession of mine. I feel like that obsession has a negative connotation, but y'all know what I mean. It was very cathartic for me to dedicate myself to breast cancer awareness and nonprofit, fundraising, event planning involvement. That was always kind of my early passion and what I wanted to do. I'm super close with my mom and my aunt. They've both had incredible careers within the nonprofit world. My mom was a huge leader within the LGBTQ plus community. She was the executive director for the largest archives globally. She's now a nonprofit consultant. My aunt has dedicated, her career to adults with disabilities. So just a lot of inspiration from them. And so I thought I wanted to go to nonprofit. I interned for Susan G. Komen, met Nancy Brinker. It was highlight of my life goals at that point in my life. I was director of philanthropy for my sorority, but realized that I wanted to kind of go more corporate and really have more intention as a volunteer to make change in that way. So that's how I ended up at Insight Global, but still really big passions of mine that I try to exercise as much as possible.
Bronwen, thank you for sharing your story. I'm sure that there's people that can relate. I want to stay there for a minute before we talk about your role now at Insight Global. So the impact of kind of your upbringing, now that you've had some years, right? You've had, a professional career now, you've had some distance. What role has that upbringing, you mentioned it a little bit as far as, I think maybe you could speak a little bit about your pool as far as like what drives you. But I'm just curious, those early years, when you said that you grew up, you guys, didn't have some of the resources that maybe other families had. You talked about food stamps and things of that nature. Just overall, your career now, what impact did kind of your upbringing have on who you are today? And would you change anything if you could hit the reset button?
Yeah. So, great question. I love that because I wouldn't change anything. It was really, really tough. Don't get me wrong. A lot of struggles, but it's definitely made me who I am today. And I feel a really strong purpose that I'm uniquely positioned to drive change. I'm a millennial, biracial, female, from a low income family, an LGBTQ plus family as well. And, just so many elements in my background. I feel like I'm uniquely positioned to drive change because I'm able to relate to a lot of different demographics and advocate for those demographics. And also working in talent solutions now at this point, the people centric aspect of that in terms of diversity and culture initiatives and, making those strides and advocating for equity in the workplace is so important to me. I'm so passionate about it. And so this is, kind of sad to admit, but I think, hopefully this will resonate. And I think there's power in sharing vulnerable stories because they can often be permission slips. But I actually used to lie about a lot of the elements of my upbringing. I would lie about my ethnicity and my family dynamic. I would lie about a lot up until, quite honestly, like college, early 20s, because I didn't understand it. I didn't feel accepted. I was bullied after 9/11, right? That's when I started lying about my ethnicity. And so it makes me sad to admit it now that I was, fabricating these stories to feel more like I could fit in or more accepted, but there's such a power in owning your truth. And so, sharing that and advocating for all of that, hopefully is making a difference.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And if you don't mind me asking, doing that, because I feel like no matter if it's, I bet there's a lot of people who can relate to your story, that they're hiding certain things, they're covering up, they're not sharing things out of different reasons, right? But I guess what I want to say there is, I'm trying to think of how I would say this. It's just, I guess looking back, do you have regret with that? Or has it really that kind of made you who you are today, right? Because that's a really powerful thing to say as far as, I did not share some things or, about my ethnicity because of a place that's understandable. But like now looking back on it, like, is there any regrets there, or did that kind of create the foundation for who you are?
Also, such a good question. And I feel like kind of honestly answers on both sides. I regret it because I feel like I missed out on understanding my own culture, my own heritage. And it's a privilege to know where you come from, right? And so I regret not being able to embrace that more. But at the same time, I don't regret it because hopefully, this is another reason that I feel so uniquely positioned to drive change, because when I started really shouting this out and talking about, having, for no reason, right? It feels ignorant to admit that there was any shame in that, because there isn't any shame in being, different or owning your truth or, any of those elements. But there's just so much power in owning that. So I don't regret it because I feel like I'm able to share it and make change. And hopefully by sharing the narrative, nobody else feels like they need to lie. And, they can see the power in sharing that, because since I have been more open and vulnerable about it, I feel like I'm impacting people more. So kind of an answer on both sides.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the response, and I can relate a little bit. So I am, I'm a member of the Salt River Piedmont Maricopa Indian community. Now, I know I do not look Native American whatsoever. I'm a quarter technically. But it's one of those things where as I've gotten older, I don't know if this is just human DNA, and maybe you can chime in, but there's something about you wanting to understand the roots of kind of just how you grew up and what you're, I think that's why we have so many of these, 23andMe and all these kind of DNA profiles, and you kind of want to understand like your origin as far as like your background, not even so much on the personal level, but your own DNA, right? I just feel like as I've gotten older, there's this natural pulling for me to understand both sides, because my mother's side is the Native American side, and then my father's side is more based in Ireland. So talk about two different mixes, right? But there's just kind of this natural pull as we get older to kind of discover our roots a little bit. Would you relate there? Yeah.
Oh, 100%. You want to know, whose shoulders you're standing on, in terms of individuals, but also, full cultures. And that's so important. And I feel you on that. My maternal side is very Irish, lots of blondes and some redheads too.
So one more question on this subject is, a lot of times when we talk to people about their careers, a lot of people don't know what they want to do with their career. Right? Mm-hmm. They don't understand like what my purpose is, or I don't understand what I'm good at. For you, maybe you're still discovering it, or maybe you've always known. but thinking about your earlier, your upbringing, your early career journey and what you do today, if you had to simplify it, like for you, what's always been your pull for the work that you do? And how did you, because you talked, I wrote it down, you said drive change. I think that's going to be something that will be talked about a lot during this session we do today. But ultimately, when you drive change, there's resistance involved, right? So for you to drive that change, was that something you've just always been wired that way? Is there some practical examples from when you were younger that you made yourself uncomfortable? Kind of speak to, I guess, two-part question. One, just kind of what is your superpower, your pull and your purpose? And then two, when it comes specifically to driving change, how have you built that skill set? Because I think there's a lot of resistance involved with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of how like specific anecdotes within my background that I think have led me to this place, I think that it has always been very innate. But also too, kind of going back to the examples, especially of my mom and my aunt, right? Like I have been inspired by those close to me who are change makers. And, I've seen them make a difference. And right as my grandma was, going through her decline, for example, I so vividly remember, the volunteers from Komen or, Zeta Tau Alpha at those races or at those community events that made such a difference for me and my family not feeling alone. So, I wanted to embody that and do that as well. And I also feel, so I actually went to boarding school on scholarship just when my grandmother was, kind of going through her slow decline. So I wasn't at home to watch the chemo and all of that. She was stage 4. And I remember I was like 13 or 14, right before I was going to boarding school. And I was like, I want my life to look this way. Even at that young age, I was like, I want to. And kind of another, answer to this question, right? You had asked about purpose and, how I kind of figured that out. I feel like it's always been connecting people and bringing people together. And so at that young age, when I was going, getting ready to go to boarding school and I was really nervous, I was like, okay, I want, my life to look this way. How can I connect all of these different, parts of me and all of these different elements to, create just a strong community and have fun with life and, once again, drive that change.
So now I want to fast forward to today. How did you get into the gaming business, the entertainment hospitality business? Kind of talk to a little bit about how you got into this industry, which ultimately led us talking today. How did you get into the gaming industry?
Yes. So it's a funny story. I had never even touched a slot machine until I moved to Las Vegas. This was in 2020. My company asked me mid-pandemic. I'd been talking to my director of emerging markets about overseas expansion. London and Sydney were on the table, and this was after a conference in January 2020. So that was the original chat. I had been supporting our government services division out of Richmond, Virginia for about 5.5 years. So obviously COVID happened. Overseas was off the table. I get a call in May 2020 and they're like, all right, Sydney's not happening. What do you think about Vegas? My mom's in LA. I've always loved, the desert. And so I'd been kind of hungry for a challenge. It was kind of a no-brainer for me to take the leap. But the intention was for me to, continue with our government services division. There are multiple Air Force bases out here in Vegas, Department of Energy, et cetera. And when I moved out here, I wanted to find a way to engage in the community. As we've talked about, nonprofit involvement, volunteerism has always been super important. I was very involved with Charlottesville Women in Tech back in Virginia, the Make-A-Wish Greater Virginia chapter as well. I was president of the Young Professionals Council. So I kept asking around and everybody in the community kept referring me to Global Gaming Women. And I was like, I'm not in gaming. But after the, 5th or 6th time it had been referred, I was like, okay, everybody loves this group. I will go check out a virtual event. So I went to one virtual networking breakfast, and this was only, it was less than 2.5 years ago, just about. And the connections and mentorship that I received there completely pulled me into the industry, and was the catalyst for this whole career pivot. And really, there was no looking back. My client base in Vegas became gaming instead of government, and a lot of things happened in between, but that was kind of the main thing.
And to help connect the dots a little bit for those who might not be familiar with the work of Insight Global, just high level, what is the kind of work that Insight Global does?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are the second largest talent solutions firm in North America. We have 67 offices across the US and Canada, and actually just opened London about 5 months ago, which we're really excited about, especially, of course, with the gaming industry. So it's our first European expansion. But we support our clients, helping them do everything related to attracting, developing, and retaining talent. So still about 50% of what we do is recruiting, really big emphasis on technology as well. But that's evolved into so many different service offerings beyond just staffing. So everything from managed services and project outsourcing, training and upskilling, executive search and recruitment process outsourcing, and then my favorite service offerings that we provide, culture and diversity consulting as well.
And on that front, because if I'm hearing you correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, you've worked more in the government sectors of within your role at Insight Global on attracting, retaining, developing talent. And then you've made a shift to the gaming side now and being based in Las Vegas.
Yes.
What are some, because I always wonder, right? Because I've only been in this business for 13 years. I really haven't been in any other business. It's always been gaming and hospitality. But you have the unique perspective of working in government in different roles. So I'm wondering what kind of, when we talk about attracting, retaining, developing talent, when we think of like the best of the best, whether it's the government sector or somebody who's a leading person within gaming, are there some core qualities that are the same no matter what sector or what field you work in?
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely say culture is number one. And, that's applicable to any industry, any company. If you have a toxic culture, that's oftentimes the biggest deterrent. That's and studies show, there's actually a great Brene Brown Dare to Lead podcast where she talks, it's Dr. Donald and Charlie Sill they did an incredible research on this topic of toxic culture. That was in MIT Sloan Management Review. They reported that toxic culture is actually 10 times more important than compensation when it comes to attracting and retaining talent. So having a good culture is so wildly important. I could talk about that for hours, but hopefully that answers.
It does. And I want to stay there because that's important, right? That's something we can all relate to. We're all in the business of attracting, retaining, and developing talent. Mm-hmm. So I want to stay there for a minute. You said toxic culture. So we're going to compare and contrast. Let's stay on the negative. So what are some key signs from all the people that you've worked with? What are some key traits so if someone might be thinking, am I in a bad work culture? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I've only worked at this one place my whole life. What are some key hallmark signs or examples of a toxic work culture?
Yeah. So I think at a very, core basic level, just looking at, right, what the equity initiatives are in an organization, right? You can typically see, if there's diversity in leadership, if there's intentionality around that, because obviously, that equates to open-mindedness, which equates to more innovation and financial success overall. But also, looking at things like benefits, right? And, flexible work policies, whether it's work from home or, if there's on-site, is there, paid childcare to add those benefits for working families. Equal parental leave has been proven to close the gender pay gap, right? So those are some baseline examples that are telltale signs. But I mean, internally, right, things like kind of going back to the intention around diversity initiatives and right, just stronger cultures. I'll actually share, an anecdote for, Insight Global firsthand. So we're an organically grown company. So we promote from within. And everybody, right, even including our CEO, starts as a recruiter in training. So back in about 2015, 2016, we were not doing great in terms of attrition and turnover. Our people were firing us. Our attrition rate was in the 60s. I think it was like 65 or 68%. It was bad. So our new CEO, Bert Bean, knew at the time. He took our executive leadership out to a, vulnerability retreat in Utah. And he was like, all right, something's broken. We need to figure out what's going on and how to fix this. And during that time, there was this extraordinary transformation with the implementation of things like our diversity council, our women's leadership council. We implemented merit-based Fridays off programs, things of that nature. The list goes on. There were so many things around diversity, equity, inclusion, and culture that were implemented. So our revenue from about 2016 to now has literally doubled. It went from a $2 billion company to about a $4 billion company last year. And our attrition rate is now less than 15%. So it's massive. And right, I love where I work. I wouldn't have moved cross country without knowing anybody if I didn't know that my company had a great culture. And so, other things like that, right? Just knowing what the intentionality is around those initiatives is so important as well, and very, very telling.
Yeah, and you said so many good things there, and I want to kind of ask this question. So we've talked a little bit about, looking at your organization or your company, looking at how you are actually implementing, to provide the best insight minds. I think we can all agree that the more diverse of a leadership group or the more diverse group thinking that we have, the better the results are going to be. Mm-hmm. But if somebody's out here who might be early in their career, even senior in their career, whether they're a manager, supervisor, a C-suite, whatever it may be, they lead people and they want to get better. What are some things that they can do outside of just, what the company infrastructure can do as far as to create a great place to work and a culture that really creates some impact?
Yes. And love this too, because, right, I probably most of us have heard the phrase, right, people don't quit their companies, they quit their boss. And that's very true. So I love the intentionality around this question about, specific, managers or, people leaders in general. So a lot of things. And I think it kind of first starts with the understanding that, right, this is not just an HR issue. To actually, drive change and to actually have the intentionality in your organization around equity and inclusion and, culture transformation, it needs to have buy-in from all levels, all departments, all divisions, all levels of the organization. This isn't just an HR topic. And I think also it's important to educate. There's a lot of unconscious bias, and it's by no fault of anyone's, right? I mean, I literally lied about my ethnicity for, almost 25 years, because of my own unconscious bias about, things. So it's nothing to be ashamed of. So, I think it can be intimidating, but to others, they don't want to get it wrong, but just owning that there might be, a learning curve there, and just consistently educating yourself. I think it's also important to harp on, equity and the importance of equity, not just equality. And, equity is understanding that different people in different stages of life or different upbringings, et cetera, they may need extra support or extra guidance in certain areas, or just a different process to achieve the same equal outcomes as others. So just education around those topics, not being afraid to, put yourself out there, even if it seems a little intimidating, and, really having, advocating and owning allyship too, if you're not necessarily, if you don't identify as diverse yourself.
Thank you for sharing that. Bronwen, I want to jump to a segment here we call the bigger picture, where I show a picture on the screen and we just kind of riff on the picture. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, highly recommend you go to nextlevelcasinocareers.com. If you're on Spotify, you can watch the video, but I'm going to kind of talk to the pictures here. So the first one I have here is you were recently, as of January 2023, recognized as 10 Women Rising in Gaming Under 40 by CDC in partnership with Global Gaming Women. Broad question, take this where you want, but these kind of accolades that you achieve, what are your thoughts as you kind of join this group of recognition? And two, what makes this this possible? The milestones and the recognition that you've got in your career.
Yeah. So, I mean, Global Gaming Women and WISE Women in Sports and Events have been so instrumental in, the development and the recognition to get to this point. And also too, I'm really grateful. I kind of mentioned this before, but just to reiterate, Insight Global, my company, has given me so much creativity and autonomy and building out portfolios that, haven't necessarily existed, or, just doing things different ways. And, getting involved with these boards, the amount of professional development and mentorship has just been unparalleled. And also the, empowering of advancements, right? Like I was actually nominated to this by GGW's president, Cassie Stratford, and our association director, Kelly Hatch. So right there, their recognition and, intentionality around, advocating for that recognition is just so important. So I'm so grateful to, all those organizations and my own company. I definitely wouldn't be here without, all of that support.
Thank you for sharing. And just a shout out, someone who's been on this podcast before, Erica Kozman, was one of my favorite conversations I've had. She's really a pro's pro, and she's one of the senior leaders in marketing over at Choctaw. But I guess the second part I want to ask on this topic before I change the slide is mentors. I'm sure you have a lot, but is there a few that stick out to you? And you can share names or not. But if you think about kind of who's played a role in your success in your career, what is the role of mentors or friends or network in general played for as a part of your success?
Yeah, absolutely. So my favorite story to share is about Sue Schneider. Sue is the best. She's my biggest mentor. So she is vice president of growth and strategies for SBC Americas. And she's also on the board of Global Gaming Women. She's sports betting Hall of Famer. I mean, Sue does it all. She's awesome. So she is actually one of the original connections I made in that first GGW breakfast, the virtual breakfast that I attended. During our follow-up conversation, it turned out that her company, SBC, was looking for a recruiting firm at that time to host a career fair for their first consumer-facing sports betting event in the States. Sue also asked me to moderate a panel, and I was terrified. I'd never moderated anything before. And I mean, I definitely could have easily let that imposter syndrome and the imposter moment. Laura Pacini, another mentor, has been amazing in the rephrasing of syndrome, because it's not a chronic condition that we have. It just comes in waves in passing. So that imposter moment, I should clarify. I definitely could have let that imposter moment get the best of me, right? Like I wasn't really, I'd only been in gaming for a couple of months at that point. I'd never moderated. It was scary. But Sue was so encouraging. She was so empowering, and she believed in me. And, her affirming my potential, and, really providing me the space to really put myself out there was so instrumental to, my confidence in myself in this space. And also just, the career and life pivot that came from that. So Sue, love you. She knows how much I appreciate her, but she's made such a difference in my life and so many other people's as well.
Thank you for sharing. I'm sure she appreciates the shout out. I want to write that down again, because I feel like a lot of us suffer from that, and we call it imposter syndrome. What did you call it? Imposter?
Yes, imposter moments. And Laura Pacini is the one who taught us this actually in my Global Gaming Women Leadership Development class last year. So, but yeah, I really like the way that she phrases that, right? Not a chronic condition. It sometimes a moment will come in a wave or in passing, but it's important not to hang on to it and let it define you.
And I love that story too, because I think leaders or future leaders can take that as advice. I think it's really important that you encourage people, coach people to be uncomfortable, whether that's to speak on a panel, to speak up in a meeting, to lead a project, whatever it is. For someone to believe in you, that goes a long way, because confidence from maybe the very, very few, like 5% of people, there's some people who are just born confident, but I'd say 95% of us, it's done through reps, and it's done through knowing that I can do this. But the only way you could get that kind of the power is just get started. So I love that story, because, you had that imposter moment. There's probably that doubt, and she pushed you and look. And I want to come back to that too, because I feel like you speak on plenty of panels. You do media. So some tips there, but yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Slide 2 here is from Global Gaming Women. It was a leadership development conference. Once again, another broad question, but so this has been mentioned on prior podcasts, as far as people just speaking about Global Gaming Women and the impact it's had on their careers, and being able to network with other women and really help each other, guide each other in their careers. For you being the co-chair, I want your take as far as the work that Global Gaming Women does, and also how can people help champion these kind of efforts to make the gaming community as a whole better?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, GGW is just so phenomenal. I'm so appreciative and grateful for the organization. And exactly to your point, so many stories of the impact it's made on so many individuals' careers within the industry. But yeah, so as co-chair for the membership committee, Kate White is our membership chair. So her and I are working together on that. We're really excited about a lot of our initiatives this year. One of them is really focused on more intentionality around regional engagement. About, I think the numbers are like 45% of our membership base is in Nevada, but gaming is all across the world, right? And we're a global organization. So adding more intentionality there, also more intentionality around membership journey. What can you get out of your membership? And I think, some important things to note too, kind of going along with this question, some common misconceptions I'll hear a lot of the time about getting involved with the organization. A lot of times, male colleagues, clients, friends, et cetera, will be like, oh, well, I don't want to attend an event. I don't want to intrude. We love allies, right? Unless it's otherwise stated. We would love to have as many allies as possible at our events. That's so important for, our mission. And the mission, of course, is advancing, empowering, connecting, and developing the women in this industry. Another common misconception that we'll hear a lot is, I'm not qualified. So this picture, actually the W Leadership Development Conference that I attended in September, I even, knowing all of these things about, the HP study, women will often only apply to jobs that they match 100% of requirements for. But if you look at male counterparts, it's, closer to 60%. So, there's kind of a hesitation in, putting yourself out there sometimes. I was looking at the requirements and it was asking for 5 years, specifically in casino gaming. I only had, it was about 2 at that point. And so I was like, hey, I don't technically have, I reached out to Kelly Hatch and I was like, don't technically have all of these, but, PASPA was overturned less than 5 years ago, right? I mainly support online. Is there any exception that can be made? And she was like, I'm so happy you reached out. 100%. And so I'll often hear a lot of times from friends and, peers in the industry, oh, I didn't hit the qualifications. I can't get there. Still put yourself out there. There's so much that we want to, empower and celebrate. And sometimes people's backgrounds are a little bit different. And I'm going back to equity, right? A lot of times, people tenure requirements or experience levels can look different for the same level of leadership and success.
And Bronwen, I want to ask another question related to this topic. You mentioned earlier personal biases, and I'm starting to try to uncover some that I may have. And one that I've thought about a lot lately is something, when people come into my office or just want to pick my ear or say things, one of the things I always say is what we talked about earlier, right? Is growth only happens from being uncomfortable. Naturally, you have to have that resistance. And that could be as simply as speaking up in a meeting, right? Mm-hmm. It could be, it doesn't have to be something grand. It could be just as letting your voice be heard. That's intentional thought, right? It doesn't mean just speak up just to speak up. But if there's something that you feel you have insight on, whether it's a project or an operations issue or whatever it may be, you have to speak up. And what I'm going with this is the personal bias I may have is for women, that might not be as easy as because of the dynamics and just maybe some things that under the hood that I don't understand. So I'm curious to know this is just general advice for leaders when encouraging, because I think we can all agree that that's good, right? To grow, you have to be uncomfortable. But maybe you could speak to just working with so many different women, be involved with global gaming women. What are some things of the dynamics that women probably deal with that men maybe don't as relates to this topic of speaking up and making your voice be heard in different group functions?
Yeah, absolutely. I can share an anecdote that just recently happened. And this doesn't directly answer your question, but I'll kind of circle back at the end of this anecdote. But, in terms of unique challenges that, women face that may not be quite as obvious to, our male or non-binary counterparts. But so, for example, I was at a recent trade show, ICE London, and this was happening. My company sponsored one of the networking parties, SBC's London Baby at the Natural History Museum. It was so much fun. And I spearheaded that. I did the whole business case, got us approved to go there. We brought a ton of clients. We had a great evening. So as I'm leaving, I was approached by an older gentleman who was trying to speak to me in French. I couldn't really quite understand what he was saying. And it turned out he was propositioning me as if I were an escort. basically mistook me for an escort and was, I won't even repeat, right, what he said, because it's wildly inappropriate, but I was shocked, right? And I feel I'm very grateful to be, a very empowered woman in this industry, and to be on these boards and, hopefully making an impact myself. So right, like, quote unquote, I should have known what to do in that situation. But right, I was so caught off guard, and I was so just disturbed. All I could do was like run away and cry, which, right, like, I wish I had a more powerful, thing that I did in that scenario. But it's just so much. And I mean, that's just one anecdote. Like, I, still hear stories about colleagues or peers who, right, are taking their lunch in dirty bathroom stalls because they're nursing and there's nowhere else for them to pump in the office. There's not a nursing room, or maybe they're, sitting in like a pod style office. The list goes on in terms of several, iterations of, still comments or, defeating moments for women in the workplace, especially in this industry too. So there are so many things that, we could talk about this for hours too. But right, what was the second part of your question as well? It's more so,
just insight as far as just leaders in general, but specifically male leaders, when you're given advice and it's in a good place, right? I think we can all agree that stretching, making yourself uncomfortable, but like I said, those personal biases you talked about, maybe some of the challenges, and I think you've kind of eloquently hit on that, as far as just the dynamics for women that are just different that you should be aware of when you kind of have these interactions.
Yeah, exactly. And, there have been, such great comments and intention that I've heard from, like, I was actually talking to one of our manufacturer clients, one of their C-levels, and about, putting together a program for getting working moms back into the workplace. And he was like, I understand, like, they'll have gaps in employment, but how can we empower those individuals to get back into, basically not miss a beat when they're coming back from maternity leave, or even if they've decided to take time off a little bit longer for, childcare or family reasons, et cetera. So I love that there is, intentionality there about, in an equitable perspective, right, biological females and, right, our trans, counterparts, right, we're the ones who have the kids biologically. So, being understanding of that, and being intentional about, once again, equitable ways to embrace and empower those circumstances is so important as well.
Thank you, Bronwen, for sharing. My next slide here is one that I hinted at earlier, but so that person, that mentor that pushed you to be on a panel to speak, just from the little research that I did, it seems like you are, out there, leading different organizations, being a senior leader, being on panels, being on podcasts, being on interviews. So just general career advice for those who, because we spoke before the recording, you said that one thing that, I think it was at a Global Gaming Women event, but something that came up pretty commonly is people said they wanted to speak on panels more. But for those who do get the opportunity, right, like, just general nuggets of wisdom of how you've been able to put yourself out there, one, but number two, kind of how you've tried to master this skill of being on panels, being a leading voice, things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was I was a little bit of a theater geek when I was a kid, so I think that definitely helps in the public speaking realm. But in terms of, more kind of specific advice, and also actually to expand on your point about our conversation before this podcast. So it was crazy. There was actually a Global Gaming Women Masterclass webinar, because that's part of a series that we do, run by Alexia Vernon, Find Your Moxie, and she had everyone kind of play this little game. She was like, all right, drop in the chat, never have I ever yet. What's something that you want to do that you haven't done yet? The majority of those answers, never have I ever been asked to speak on a panel. Never have I ever been asked to speak at G2E. The list went on. So there's obviously a large group of female leaders in this industry that are hungry for those thought leadership opportunities. But there's a disconnect, because then a lot of times when I'll talk to content directors at a lot of these, trade show organizations, they're like, oh, we want to find more, female leaders that we can, and, raise their voices, but it's hard. We can't find them. And it's like, oh my gosh, if you have any trouble finding any, reach out to me personally, reach out to Global Gaming Women, reach out to WISE, Women in Sports and Events Las Vegas. There's so many organizations that are, dedicated to raising these voices. So it's sad and shocking to me when, people think that there aren't enough of us out there to go around, because there are. And we want those thought leadership opportunities. But I think for advice, right? I've personally found that those imposter moments, it's not syndrome, it tends to, it still comes in waves for me all the time, but it tends to dissipate when you realize that you are uniquely qualified to speak on that topic, right? And all of us are uniquely positioned based on our backgrounds, based on our personal experiences, to have a voice, to have a very interesting and impactful perspective on a lot of these topics. So I think leaning into that and, really defining your purpose, defining what success looks like for you, reflecting on how, things in your background have, got you to where you are, and, how you can leverage those stories to impact others. That has been those reflection periods have really been when the imposter moments dissipate for me, speaking on a panel. So hopefully that's helpful advice.
Yeah. If it's more so, at least from you, it's less about if I'm hearing you right, it's less about the technicality and more about just being able to override, that imposter moment. Mm-hmm. And I guess because here's what I always tell people, and not that I have like tons of public speaking experience, but for me, two things have been very helpful. One is I find that most people are their own harshest critic. Mm-hmm. Like you'll go home and be like, man, why did I say that? I should have said this. Or like even when I do these podcast recordings, if you listen to the first few episodes, I say things like, which is very common. Yeah. But you have the tendency to beat yourself up. And then number two is just putting yourself in a space of value. I know that might sound corny, but it's really true. Like with that, those people are not going home thinking about you and what you said and how you flubbed that. Like, they're on to the next thing, but you're carrying that with you rather than be that. How can I bring value? If I'm speaking on a panel, a podcast, leading a lecture, whatever it may be, we want to begin with why. Why am I speaking? And two, how can I provide the most value to these people and include them? And I find that by having that mindset, you kind of override some of those jitters. I don't know if you've experienced the same.
Yes, exactly. And recognizing your value and owning that. And right, if there's ever a situation where you want to practice, like I always practice in front of the mirror, right? Write down my topics and try to get comfortable, just muscle memory with your tongue about, topics that you want to say, practicing, with friends too. We've been having these talks within Global Gaming Women as well as WISE. I know like you and I have kind of had these talks too about where is like a place where we can put together almost like an internal Toastmasters to kind of have a space for thought leadership practice almost, to hopefully help avoid jitters for, those real life events. But also too, I mean, quite honestly, before my first in-person panel a couple of years ago, I was so nervous. I ended up on the phone with my mom and my aunt for hours beforehand. I mean, they had to like talk me down. So it is so natural. I think just, knowing your support system where you can practice and get those nerves out is important too.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing those stories. And then also I'm glad that Chandra synced us up because, I am interested in connecting with more leaders and having them on this podcast. I think great things are going to happen because of that.
Yes,
Last slide here of this segment. I grabbed two things from your LinkedIn. Just curious to know your thoughts and why they resonated with you. So the first one we'll start with is remember why you started. And to me, that's powerful, but I'm curious to know why that resonates with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So honestly, going back to the beginning of our conversation, right? Remember why you started, where you started. Once again, feeling uniquely positioned to drive change. There aren't a lot of people with my background and my dynamic. It's felt isolating and kind of like I'm on an island at a lot of points in my life. But I found that I'm able to really impact a lot of different demographics and advocate for a lot of different demographics. And so just always keeping that in mind, that also helps the imposter moments as well. And, you know, just knowing your purpose adds so much passion to what you do. And on those super tough days, because obviously there are a ton of them, you know, being able to hold on to that and knowing, you know, why you're doing something and the purpose for you being there is just so important to get you through those tough times.
Yeah. And that you hit on something that was powerful to me when I saw that, which is, I think sometimes when you zoom out, a lot of times, and I'm not undermining some of the problems or some of the things that are challenges that happen in life, but a lot of times when you zoom out, it's just a brief moment in time. Mm-hmm. And to me, remember why you started is also another quote that I like a lot is, I can't remember who says it, but it's something along the lines, and I've mentioned it before, to, you know, one day I won't be able to do this. Today is not that day. Mm-hmm. You know, so a lot of the changing that perspective of I have to do this to I get to do this. Yes. You know, and even in those hard moments, I feel like remember why you started kind of plays into that. Zoom out, understand why you're doing this. And, you know, that could be really powerful.
Exactly. And I mean, also too, I think it's important to note, you know, don't be hard on yourself or don't judge yourself for, you know, moments where maybe you forget. Literally last week, this happened to me. I had a really tough day and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Right. So, I mean, it happens to all of us. It's just, I don't think, you know, you should judge yourself or, you know, hold shame for it happening to you. It's more so, you know, how do you respond to it? What do you do with that information? How do you bring yourself back up in the days, you know, weeks following that?
Yep, absolutely. The second one here is, it looks like Twitter or somewhere on social, somebody put, every work email I send, hey, sorry to bug you, was just wondering if it's not too much trouble, would it be possible to do the thing you said you do? Totally fine if not. Probably my fault anyway. I'm an idiot. Sorry to bother you. Sorry I exist. So sorry. Just let me know. Emily. And I think she was speaking to about, you know, just not being so apologetic in the way that we speak, but just curious to know your perspective as far as when you saw this, why you shared it, and what's the bigger lesson you want to share with others?
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is a repost from the Female Quotient, incredible organization, equality services company. They put on amazing equality lounges at large trade shows and events globally. That's just one small part of everything that they do. So love that organization. And yeah, I thought this was pretty facetious. And, you know, definitely wanted to share it. There are a lot of memes like this that, you know, are floating around in women's organizations because there is a difference in you know, articulation a lot of times that you'll see with females, young females, that do kind of lead with that apologetic just vibe for even being there, for doing your job, right? I've personally, so my name's Bronwen Gregg. I personally have seen tone completely shift via emails when people think I'm Gregg, which happens all the time. Gregg is my alter ego. People usually think I'm Mr. Bronwen, that I'm a man. And it is absolutely fascinating to see the tone of an email completely shift, whether it's a candidate, a coworker, a client, whoever it might be, when they think I'm the man and when they think I'm a woman. And so it's, you know, it's not just something that is happening internal for young women. It's often too the way that, you know, we're asked questions or, you know, spoken to. It just kind of creates this vibe of, you know, needing to apologize. And we don't need to apologize for anything. There's also obviously a big societal thing about, you know, women have to be nice. And I mean, gosh, like the amount of stories you've heard about like serial killers and right, their victims not wanting to make them feel bad or not wanting to be rude, right? Like there's nothing wrong with having a concise and straightforward vernacular in the workplace. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't need to apologize. And, you know, shifting, like I've even tried myself, instead of saying, I'm so sorry, I didn't get to this, you know, or I'm so sorry, you know, for my delay. Thank you for your patience, right? Like it's just as simple as that. So changing your phrasing in some of those positions can be empowering for yourself, and also, you know, help you be more straightforward and concise in business as well.
Yeah, Serena, my coworker, and I were just chatting about this. She hosts some of these podcasts too, about this exact target, and we were basically saying like you can do both, which I think you so eloquently hit on. Like you could still be straightforward, non-apologetic, but still at the same time be kind. Like two truths could be the same. It doesn't mean that, oh, well, now I'm being rude because I'm being, no. And I love that you gave some examples there of like practically how you could do it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So, Bronwen, I want to be respectful of your time. It's 11:03. Do you have a hard stop?
I don't.
Okay. So either way, I have some final questions here. Once again, just thank you for being here. Some more that are quick in nature. In your opinion, because you've, I guess, two-part question. Just one, some surprises when you first got into the gaming industry, maybe misconceptions, whether those are good or bad or, you know, whatever it may be. And then two, looking forward, based on what you know now, what does the industry look like 10 years from now? So misconceptions or surprises or ahas working in this industry. And then what are your thoughts in the future looking 10 years out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, so any like negative misconceptions or, you know, negative surprises, kind of going back to the example that I used earlier, right? That happened to me at the trade show recently. I think that, you know, sums up kind of the, the culture that I wasn't necessarily expecting. But in a more positive light, the innovation has been so cool to be a part of. And that's something that, right, I wasn't familiar with as kind of an average American consumer, you know, in a state that doesn't, you know, have a lot of it, or had not before had a lot of intention around gambling. But so the innovation has been really, really fascinating and exciting to see. And it is just so cool, the overlap with other industries as well. You know, I think that a lot of people, they still have like a stigma around gaming, casinos, gambling, all of that, not necessarily realizing the intentionality around responsible gaming. That is so impressive that a lot of these organizations are doing, or the overlap with sports, the overlap with media and entertainment, the really impressive technology that, you know, is happening within the industry. So those are definitely things that were really cool, pleasant surprises that were just really exciting to learn and be a part of. And looking forward, I mean, I think that there are amazing strides happening in terms of, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion, and intention around culture that we're starting to see. But obviously, there needs to be more, right? There are studies out there. I think it was like a Pew Research Center study that reported it was like 50% of the workforce within the next, gosh, I forget the exact year. I think it was like by, I don't know the exact year. It was in a couple of years. It is going to be female, and that if you look at millennials and Gen Z, it's still about 50% that identify as diverse in terms of their ethnicity. So, right, you've got this whole workforce that's just changing outside of just the industry itself. But you know, hopefully, we're going to see more equity moving forward, and hopefully, too, no longer as much of a stigma around the industry as well.
Thank you for sharing. If you had to, because you've worked with being on WISE, GGW, your role now, your role before working with the government sector, you've interacted with a lot of people. And if you think about, you've also interacted with the best minds in multiple sectors. If you had to boil it down to three traits that, let's just say, of your total portfolio, or the total of the people you've interacted with, if you had to narrow it down to like the top 2%, as far as just being the best at their craft, dedicated, great leaders. You had to boil it down to three traits they all have in common. What would those three traits be?
Love this. So I think definitely first, open-mindedness. I think that's really, really important. And I think going along with that, humility. Open-mindedness, humility, you know, being open to pivots where they're needed. There's actually a chapter in the book Good to Great by Jim Collins that talks about basically making sure that the right people are on the right seat on the right bus before you delve into, right, a strategic initiative or, you know, a mission or anything like that. Because if you have those right people on the right seat on the right bus, if you do need a pivot, they're still aligned with that mission. Right there, you've got this incredible culture that's been built. And so I think that open-mindedness and that humility, right, that it's not just all about the leader, it's really about the team around them, is so important. So I think those are definitely the standouts in terms of also too, I would add to that too. And this kind of goes along with open-mindedness, but a really strong intention around going back to the original point, driving change. And I mean, that goes with, pivoting as well, but just having the intention innately as well, advocating and being a part of these groups within the industry. And once again, making sure that, talking about these topics, it doesn't just fall into an HR issue.
100%. And I wrote down that quote: right people, right seat on the right bus. That's powerful. And I think that's a perfect segue into books. So, because we want to talk a little bit about resources outside of just networks and the things we've talked about. So for you, it seems like you're a reader. If there's like a favorite book you like to gift, what's that book?
Yes. So I actually do have a book that I gift all the time. So Untamed, Glennon Doyle. So amazing. Actually, come to find out, Glennon is actually from the same town in Virginia as me. So a lot of the little stories and anecdotes she has from earlier in her, childhood and just personal development are actually in my town, which I didn't even know at first. But anyway, her book is all about, untamed, right? It's breaking through the societal constructs that are often placed on women, and breaking through of them, recognizing them, and owning our power in a lot of different ways. I mean, she explores parenthood, she explores work, she explores romantic relationships. I mean, it's really across the board. So I really, really love everything that she stands for and talks about in Untamed. Highly recommend.
Thank you for sharing that. You've said some great quotes, referenced some great quotes, but is there one that you like to use, or is there a quote that sticks out to you that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yes, actually, it's in my coffee cup like every morning. I don't know if you can really see this, but it's a Stacey Abrams quote. Like most who are underestimated, I have learned to overperform. And I love that so much because, I mean, it kind of ties up everything that we've been talking about, right? Uniquely positioned, drive change, understanding, your purpose, your intention. And I think it's just so important, right? In owning your truth and advocating for what you're passionate about.
It's a great one. Hobby outside of work. We've talked a lot about your personal and professional development, but what do you like to do for fun when you're not in career mode?
Yes. So my favorite thing in the world is travel. I love it. I try to go to several new places a year. Before COVID, I was really traveling heavily internationally, Thailand, Australia, Bali, Greece. I mean, all the places. I love it. I just love being in a new place and meeting new people with completely different backgrounds and embracing new perspectives, having deep conversations. And me and some of my best friend travel buddies, we love to appetizer hop in all the cities that we go to. And honestly, sometimes I will spend hours just making itineraries for fun or watching YouTube videos about different places that I want to go. So definitely one of my favorite things.
What's for those who, because I always like to pick the brain of someone who travels a lot. If like you can only go to one place, and I know you probably ask follow-up questions. Well, what are you looking for? But just net, your overall best travel destination for anybody listening, for you, what would you recommend is like the great place to travel if you only go to one place this year?
So my favorite trip ever was Bali, Indonesia. Absolutely amazing experience. And one of the things that I really love when I travel is, maybe it's not like the most beautiful beach or right, like the top tourist destination, but a place that I can actually, or would actually envision myself living, right, in another life, or maybe in this life later on. And so there was this one little town in Bali, Canggu, and it was where a lot of expats would, live. And it's such a creative center. There were so many interesting people that we were meeting, and it was one of my favorite travel experiences ever. Canggu and Bali.
There you have it. A subject you nerd out on, maybe like, once again, maybe that not a lot of people know about, but something that you nerd out on outside of career.
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, this includes my career, but I feel really lucky, right? Like we all hear like the quote, like if you do what you love, like you're not working a day in your life. Like I truly feel that. And I feel very passionate about work-life blend, right? Kind of bringing it all together. So, I mean, topic I nerd out on is right, advocating for diversity, equity, inclusion. It's just such a passion of mine in a lot of different parts of my life. And, I love like reading articles, reading initiatives that, organizations are focused on. It's one of my favorite things.
All right. My final two questions here. I asked this for the past guests, and I think your perspective is unique because you've interacted with a lot of different people. True or false? You're the average of the 5 people you associate the most with.
Yeah. So I think the premise is true to an extent, but I think 5 people is very limiting. I definitely don't think it's 5 people. And I definitely don't think it's only people that you necessarily know. I think there's a lot of power, right? I mean, obviously we're on a podcast. We both love podcasts, and, I love to read too, all of that. So there's a term that I learned, it's called expanders. And when you see somebody who, or hear of somebody who is embodying or really successful at, something or qualities that you're really aspiring to, rather than being jealous or, trying to knock them down or whatever, it expands your perspective to see what's possible for you and yourself. So even if it's not necessarily, a real person that maybe it's a podcast host or, a leader that you admire or, someone you follow on Instagram, whatever, that could even, classify in that category too. But I do think that for sure, average of the people that you spend the most time with or the most engaged with, whether it's in real time or virtual, et cetera. So I think to an extent, but at a bigger scale.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this other thing I've played around with, this concept of, I kind of feel like that's true on podcasts. And I couldn't narrow it down to 5. You're right. But like the inputs that you take, you kind of are a blend of all those different things. You're the average of the top 5 podcasts you listen to. So I agree. It's not 5, but there is something to like where you put your energy. And I like that you hit on too, like the resources. Like so often we're stuck with networking. And I think we all agree the power of networking is unmatched, but there's just so many resources that are available today that weren't available 20 years ago. Yes. So a lot of times we look at the internet and social media with the glass half empty perspective. The half full perspective is we can connect with individuals. We can have resources in our ear while we work out or while we clean the house, right? There's just so many different inputs that can impact our life positively that I feel like doesn't make the headlines like some of the, the pessimistic views of those resources,
Yeah, exactly. And you touched on a good point too about, right, like everybody's focused on the networking groups, et cetera. Brooke Fiamara actually said this on our CES panel, but the networking event is very much the appetizer, right? There's so much follow-up that, you should be doing after that to continue that engagement. So to your point, whether it's research and taking advantage of all the resources that we have available to us online or, connecting with individuals that you've met there through intentional follow-up. But yeah, the networking event is definitely the appetizer. There's so much more in terms of engagement that follows that.
And my internet's cutting out on me. I feel like it's telling me that I got to wrap, but it's okay because this is the final question I have for you, Bronwen. And once again, I just want to thank you for taking the time. I have found this so valuable. I know our audience will as too. But the last question we always ask everybody is, we're all about taking people's careers to the next level. For you, if you were to provide 3 tips to somebody that they could apply right now, listening, as far as how can I take my career to the next level, what are those 3 tips you would provide to that individual?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've kind of touched on them, but I would definitely say, putting yourself out there, networking, all of that. But also to, right, being able to really define your purpose and define your definition of success and help that, drive you through the tough moments. And also just really putting yourself out there in terms of saying yes to situations that are making you uncomfortable. Going back to, right, Sue empowering me to be on the panel, breaking through the imposter moment, or what Brooke says about networking events just being an appetizer. All of those things are so valuable in terms of thought leadership, getting yourself to the next level and putting yourself out there.
Awesome. Well, there you have it, Bronwen. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you.
And I hope we could do it again sometime.
Yes, thank you so much for everything you're doing with this podcast. This is incredible. So I really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Bronwen. Have a good day.
You too.
Check out more episodes on nextlevelcasinocareers.com.